violence? And is violence objectively true? Or can it be subjectively true, like that was violent for me, but not for them? And how do we create our laws? Is speech violent? Or does something need to be objectively violent for the police to intervene and arrest someone? All of those ideas we're going to explore today. I'm Carrie Blazer, the reincarnation of Mary Magdalene, the divine feminine. My soul's name is Sophia. And the biggest reason I'm here is to share my free ebook linked below, my 6 divine feminine self-love strategies, teaching people how to self-reflect, teaching people how to transform their emotional wounds into personal wisdom. Self-love creates heaven on earth because heaven is a frequency emanated from our hearts because we live in a holographic universe. I'm going to get into all of that today, but let's start with a short from Michael Knowles, who gets into this idea about, is speech violent or is objective reality violent? Like, is violence subjective or is violence objective? And he has a debate with a professor because this really helps us understand why young people talk the way they do. So let's get into Michael Knowles first. Here we go.
When this liberal snowflake claimed that speech is violence, Michael Knowles made her regret her words instantly.
Hello. You cited a list of statistics in your talk, which you claim support the idea that illegal immigrants are dangerous or criminals.
I cited a number of statistics that show that they commit federal crimes at a significantly higher rate than native-born Americans. Yeah.
Okay. So what role do you think that structural racism and inherent bias has to play in those statistics?
I don't think that the people who enter this country illegally are forced to do so by some sort of systemic racism. There's no systemic American racist going down to El Salvador and saying, you better get up and sneak into the United States. And there's nobody in the United States who forces people who come here illegally to commit crimes.
That's not what I'm saying. I'm talking about the fact that I'm faculty here. I also support protester in the back.
What do you support specifically? Do you think that anti-immigrant rhetoric is violent free speech?
Yes, because of the reasons
you think that speech is violence?
No, I think that
that's what that sign says.
The conversation that you're having is oppressive, and
so I am oppressing people by what I'm doing. So I am exerting violence on people by my speech. That means that you, a faculty member at an American public university, paid for by taxpayer dollars, are conflating speech with violence.
Yes, speech can be violent. What you are saying contributes to systemic racism in this country. It means that my students of color are pulled over and accused of stealing a car when they did not.
I'm not pulling anybody over for stealing any cars. I see many people of many different races in this room. They all seem to be doing just fine. I don't think any of them have felt violence because they listened to a lecture on basic facts about our immigration system.
Are you here to ask us if we felt violence, or are you just assuming that we haven't?
No, I haven't asked because no violence has been committed on you. Because violence is not a subjective feeling. Violence is an objective fact.
Yeah, and I will agree with Michael Knowles. If I shoot someone in the head, that is objectively violent. If I call 10 people stupid, they will react in 10 different ways, all based on who they are and how emotionally mature they are. If I call a 5-year-old stupid, we'll react one way. A 16-year-old, a 30-year-old, an 80-year-old. So how can we have laws based on subjective reality when our subjective reality is all different and we all respond differently? It used to be that when you weren't able to have civil discourse in public with someone with opposing views, that you went home, dealt with your own crap, and came back. Why is it that in a university, a professor is saying that he wants to shut down a speech because it's oppressive? As if everyone internalizes things in the same way, as if we don't live in a holographic universe. Is she advocating for cancel culture? All right, let's get into our next clip from Dr. Andrew Huberman, who gets into the challenges of cancel culture and what his recommendations are.
What we need to do is start to figure out how we can, I think, especially for the next generation of kids, how to teach them to regulate their nervous system so that they recognize that pulse of adrenaline as placing them in a compromised position Like, we have to leverage the idea that being able to hear and listen hinges on the ability to be calm. So therefore, the ability to be calm is crucial to hearing and listening is crucial to our advancement as individuals and as groups. The problem is everyone's been trying to do this backwards. They've said we all have to get along, we have to cancel culture, we all have to, listen to one another. And I think, again, we have to start from the inside. We have to teach it physiologically. Now, I don't have a master plan on how to do that, but one of the reasons I'm here and one of the reasons I'm, teaching neuroscience on Instagram and not just in my laboratory is until we can learn to regulate the self, I don't think we're going to get where we want to go as a culture. What we need to do.
Do you think that the people in the back of that lecture hall with Michael Knowles and the professor, has she learned how to regulate herself? Has the professor learned how to regulate her own emotions, or is she projecting her own fears onto society, then holding society accountable for it? If we look at Carl Jung, which we'll get to in a minute, we're going to learn about projection, because his work supports the work with the laws of physics that we live in a holographic universe, that our heart, in cardiology, that our heart is a vortex, projecting how we feel about ourselves outwards. And then when it hits the quantum field, we see where we resonate. Where are we a vibrational match? Am I a vibrational match with selfishness? Or am I a vibrational match with compassion? Where am I a vibrational match? Well, let's let another person, Melanie Phillips, talk about Islamophobia and what's going on there before we do a deep dive into agreeing with Dr. Huberman. How can we learn to regulate the self? And that's where my 6 Divine Feminine Self-Love Strategies come in, my free ebook, and my meditation shamanic drumming video. Basically, we're learning how to change the energy in our soul and our field. Because per Einstein, the field is the sole governing agency of the particle. So if our field has a lot of fear, guilt, and shame, what comes out of our hearts is fear, guilt, and shame, and then we project it onto society unknowingly, and then we hold society accountable to that fear, guilt, and shame like the professor was trying to do in support of her protester. Michael Knowles is an oppressor that needs to be stopped and silenced. Cancel culture. But when we all acknowledge that we live in a holographic universe, that what we perceive and what we're drawn to is based upon the wounds and the wisdom inside of our own soul, then we take accountability for ourselves. Then when we take accountability for ourselves and expand our emotional range, we're capable of civil discourse, like Dr. Huberman just talked about. But let's get to Melanie and see what she has to say, because it's fascinating. And then we're going to get into a clip from a recent UK police officer who successfully discusses with some Islamic men in the UK about why she will not engage in cancel culture, which I thought was a great discussion that she had there. Here we go.
Stuff going on in the Islamic world which needs to be criticized, and not just criticized, but vigorously opposed, because it's a threat to life and limb. It's a threat to the core values of the West. It should not be tolerated. Now, one can't say that because one is immediately accused of Islamophobia. If you talk about the rape and pimping gangs being mainly perpetrated by Pakistani heritage Muslim men, you're immediately accused of Islamophobia. It's been had an absolutely chilling effect. And now the current Labour government is flirting quite badly with the idea of criminalizing it further. So the problem with Islamophobia is that it criminalizes legitimate and necessary discussion about Islam. And one of the things it criminalizes or seeks to suppress is the criticism or identification or acknowledgement of Muslim anti-Semitism. Okay, as we have been discussing, anti-Semitism is across cultures and creeds, and it's rampant throughout the West among a lot of white-skinned people, a lot of people of different creeds and cultures. But nevertheless, there is a disproportionate amount of anti-Semitism in the Muslim world. The Muslim world is one of the most anti-Semitic cultures on earth, and is in large measure responsible for much of the uprising against Israel and the Jewish people that we've seen since October 7. It's been led by Islamists, some of whom are, attached to the Hamas, some of whom are run by Iran, but basically Muslims who are enraged about Jews and enraged about the West. You can't address the problem of anti-Semitism in Britain without saying, well, we have to have, again, against Islamophobia as well. So you can't, Muslims are not sending their children to schools behind barbed wire and fortified doors. Muslims don't post guards on every communal activity that they have. Okay, there are people who are prejudiced against Muslims, of course. There are people who are prejudiced against Sikhs and Hindus and Chinese people and people with red hair. I mean, prejudice against anybody is bad. We can surely all agree on that. But in terms of who is actually suffering from not just prejudice, but attacks, what's going on against Jewish people is off the scale. Now, we read, Islamophobia and anti-Muslim attacks have gone up. Well, I'm sure they have, and that's not good, obviously not good, but it's nothing compared with the risk and the threat to the Jewish community, which has been severe for decades. I mean, Jewish children in Britain have been educated and communal activities have been going on behind guarded fortresses for many, many years. And I'm afraid Muslims are disproportionately involved in those attacks.
So I'm going to link that below if you want to get into the full discussion there. But let's see how Islamic men in the UK handle speech that they deem to be violent or oppressive or wrong, and how this police officer handles it, before we do a deep dive into how Carl Jung perceives speech and action in terms of violence. So let's see how this police officer handled it. Here we go.
I hear what you're saying. In this country, we have freedom of speech, the same way you guys have your freedom of speech. Now, you guys don't need to see eye to eye, and you don't need to agree, and you're all more than welcome to stand here and have conversations with them, but they're not being aggressive. They're not.
Someone will come here, break this, that's messed up.
That's their risk. That's their risk.
I feel the police. Because on the way, I heard them say a offensive word about the religion. I ignored it. I came back. On the way, he's talking about a prophet, then he's like a donkey.
So he clarified to your friends what he says.
Yeah, but it's like, no. I could misunderstand the word, but when hundreds of people are stopping, because what you say, there must be something wrong.
Yeah. The logic is, because everyone's doing it, then it must be right. Well, everyone's stopping, so that guy must be wrong. We live in a holographic universe. Just because everyone's stopping doesn't not equate with incorrectness or violence. Yes, it's in a Muslim neighborhood, but why are we even talking about whether it is or isn't in a Muslim neighborhood? Freedom of speech is freedom of speech. And what happens when we stop speech? We repress people's ability to individuate, to be authentic. Saying Muhammad is a donkey doesn't hurt the religion, but in Islamic law, you're not allowed to say that. You're not allowed to express that. You're not allowed to be authentic to yourself. And if you look at how childhood trauma is developed, when kids are raised in a healthy family, their attachment style is healthy and their authenticity, their ability to individuate is healthy. But you can't individuate here because you'll be, you're hating on the prophet. It can't happen, right? You can't even talk about that. So how can Islam create a civil society when they constantly engage in cancel culture? Like Andrew Huberman said, if we want to have civil discourse, we have to regulate the self. And they're regulating everybody else. They're projecting lack of regulation and punishment for it. But they're not regulated. If they were emotionally regulated, they wouldn't care what those people said. Because it sounds like they're having an argument on a kindergarten, throwing sand at each other. It's a very immature argument. Well, he called me a donkey. Well, he said I was bad. I mean, are we 5?
So why is he doing that? Yeah.
What's the moral of the story? Is he allowed to do whatever he did?
Yes.
Now, that was a great clip. The sound was
Yeah. Is he allowed to do whatever he wants to do? Yes, he's just using words. He's not using a gun. There is no physical violence. And if we're going to have the police spend their time policing what people say in order to stand up for people's emotions about how they feel about themselves, I mean, we just got a parenting police force schooling kids on the kindergarten ground because they got offended because someone said something that doesn't make them feel good. Let's teach everyone how to regulate themselves, not how to control other people. Regulating themselves is my 6 divine feminine self-love strategies. But let me bring up what Carl Jung has to say about this and see how that can help us understand what's going on. From a Carl Jung perspective, speech and physical violence are fundamentally different phenomenon, even though speech can have powerful psychological effects. Jung would not equate speech with physical violence in a literal sense, but he did recognize that speech can carry profound psychological force, either healing or destructive. So speech as expression of psychic energy, libido. So for Carl Jung, speech is an expression of psychic energy, of our soul, of our energy body, not just sexual energy. It can reveal unconscious material, shape consciousness, and influence the psychic development of self and others. Words can wound psychologically because they activate unconscious complexes. They do, but am I responsible for other people's emotions? If I call 10 people stupid, are they going to react the same way? No. So how can I be held responsible for that? It's speech, it's not physical. For example, a harsh insult can activate a childhood shame complex. So if harsh speech triggers someone to the surface, that's helping the person see themselves. This is why the capacity for discourse in public amongst adults is so necessary, because we all need to see ourselves. And no one is 100% right. But when we act like I'm right and you're wrong, and there's no room for discourse, then we don't grow. We don't give each other a chance to grow and mature. And Carl Jung even says, what irritates you about others can lead you to an understanding of yourself. Triggers are your healing friend, not your healing foe. When your emotional pain's the surface, it's a perfect time to self-reflect. And the first 6 of my divine feminine self-love strategies is appreciate, learn, forgive equals ego death. Appreciate your challenges. Open your heart to yourself. Say, thank you for giving me an opportunity to grow. And the next one is learn your lessons through self-reflection. Why was it necessary for that to happen? Why was it necessary for me to attempt suicide? For me to see and understand myself. Turn that wound into wisdom. Then once you have the wisdom, forgiveness naturally follows. A compassionate word can help integrate fragmented parts of the psyche. Well, in my book, link below, My Inner Heroine, Exploring Feminine Pain, my second and third heroes are Justin Waller and his best friend, Andrew Tate. I had a personal relationship with Justin Waller that started 2 months before Andrew's takedown started in 2022. And then, because I was connected to Andrew's soul, I'm a shaman, I speak to souls, I was able to support him in solitary confinement and show myself how much compassion I'm capable of. But Jung would still distinguish this from physical violence, which damages the body directly. Speech as carrier of archetypal forces. When we're unaware of our archetypes in our subconscious, that's like a savior complex. Jung believes speech often expresses archetypal energies unconsciously. Speech driven by the shadow or the subconscious, the wound, can become hostile, dehumanizing, or cruel. But that's how we feel about ourselves. We project out through our hearts our own energy, how we feel about ourselves, onto the field so we can see ourselves for self-improvement. The universe is a mirror showing me myself in every moment as a constant feedback loop for self-improvement. And yes, shows me the beauty too. Speech driven by the self can become integrative, truthful, and healing. When people use speech destructively, projection of unconscious material, failure of individuation, when I hate you and you're gross, I'm talking about myself. Like The View, the TV show The View, you're Islamophobe, you're racist, you're misogynist. They are speaking about themselves. That came out of their soul, out of their heart, to project onto their hologram so they can see themselves. They're just unaware of the process. Possession by unconscious complexes. Like me, I had a very traumatic childhood, and I had a lot of complexes I had to work through. The danger of repressing speech. Jung strongly warned against it. This is crucial. Jung repeatedly emphasized that repressed psychic material becomes more dangerous, not less. So Islamists repressing other people is really repressing themselves. They're projecting what they've been indoctrinated by and out through their hearts to make everybody like them. If everybody's like us, then I'm right. See? Well, the more people, the more right. That's not how reality works. If 100 people believe 1 + 1 = 3, that doesn't mean 1 + 1 = 3. It means 100 people are wrong. Numbers is often mob rule, as we see in Islam a lot. One of his central principles, what is not made conscious becomes fate. If speech is excessively suppressed or policed, Jung would predict unconscious resentment grows. Shadow material accumulates, eventually erupts in more destructive ways. Oh, Islam is quite the terrorist organization, but it's in their religion. Kill the infidels. Psychological violence versus physical violence. Jung recognized that psychological harm is real, but he did not equate it with physical violence. Physical violence damages the body directly, immediately threatens survival. Psychological harm through speech acts indirectly through symbolic or emotional systems, requires interpretation by the psyche. The psyche mediates speech. The body directly experiences physical force. This is an important distinction. That's why when I said, if you call 10 people stupid, 10 people will respond differently. But if I hit 10 people, depending on how big they are, I will inflict an appropriate amount of harm. It's direct, it's immediate. That's why it can be policed. But speech is not direct, it's not immediate. I hate Islam is not 10 Muslims immediately get killed. It's not how it works. Individuation requires free expression of the psyche. That's the authentic self. And I'm going to share, Dr. Gabor Mate after this about why it's so important to both attach in a healthy way with your parents. And is when your parents have a healthy attachment to self, and that's what's modeled in the home, then the children develop a healthy attachment to self. But when the parents can't model that in the home, like in an abusive family like me, then what most often happens is children develop they do not have a secure attachment to self. And right now in America, between 40 and 60% of kids, depending on the study, they do not have a secure attachment to self, meaning they're mentally ill. And an equal percentage is with the adult population in America. But let's read here about individuation. Jung believed individuation, the development of a whole integrated self, requires confronting unconscious material consciously. Like he said, one does not become enlightened by imagining beings of light, but by making their darkness conscious. This requires honest speech, open dialogue, expression of difficult truths. Well, if we're shutting down speech because someone else's feelings got hurt temporarily, how could we express difficult truths? Like Michael Knowles, he was expressing a difficult truth, and the professor wanted to shut it down. She's a professor. Jung's analysis of totalitarian societies. Jung studied Nazi Germany and Soviet Russia closely. He observed that when speech is heavily controlled, shadow material becomes projected onto enemies. Collective psychological pathology increases. Individuals become less psychologically mature. It keeps a very immature, psychologically destructive population when we do not let individuals express themselves. He saw free speech as psychologically important for maintaining conscious awareness, maintaining healthy adults capable of civil discourse, right? Adults capable of regulating the self. Speech can be destructive, but suppression carries its own dangers. Speech can dehumanize, fragment the psyche, reinforce unconscious projections. But suppressing speech can drive unconscious material deeper, increase shadow possession, create more dangerous eruptions later. Jung favored consciousness over repression. Jung's likely core position summarized: speech is not literally violence in the same sense as physical violence. However, speech carries psychic energy and can psychologically wound, but it's indirect and not immediate, and the person has time for discernment. The solution, from his perspective, is not repression, but consciousness. Jung's ultimate emphasis: integration, not suppression. This requires expression, reflection, responsibility, and conscious awareness. Those four actions are what create a healthy adult, a mature adult. The bottom line is speech is psychologically powerful and can harm the psyche, but does not immediately harm the body. And that's the challenge that I see. But let me bring up Dr. Gabor Mate, and he's going to show us, explain this kind of comparison between what we need, the attachment and the authenticity. Sorry, let me back that up and I'll share my screen. Hang on. That didn't go very well. Where's my sound? Oh, sound wasn't on. Sorry about that.
What happens to a child where the attachment need is not compatible with the need for authenticity? In other words, if I'm authentic, my parents will reject me. If I feel what I feel and express what I feel and insist on my own truth, my parents can't handle it. And parents convey those messages unconsciously all the time. Not because they mean to, not because they don't love the child, not because they're not trying to do their best, but because they themselves are suppressed or traumatized or hurt or stressed. And what does the child do with that? Well, if I give up my attachment for the sake of authenticity, I lose my relationships on which my life depends. Therefore, there's no question. What becomes suppressed is our authenticity, our emotions. And then we become 25 and 30 or 35, 40, and we don't know who we are. What happens to it?
So now I'm going to share a Carl Jung quote from my book. And it's about projection, about what happens when we repress ourselves, when we don't express ourselves authentically in a healthy way, when we don't surf the waves of life, when we don't express our emotions. What happens? Let me make the presentation. And so this is from my book, My Inner Heroine, Exploring Feminine Pain. And in my book goes over how I went from a suicide attempt to attracting 6 men into my life who mirrored my wounds back to me so I could see myself. The second and third were Justin Waller and, yes, Andrew Tate. So let's read the Carl Jung about projection, because a lot of people project onto Andrew. So I thought this was a great quote for their chapter in the book. If you imagine someone who is brave enough to withdraw all of his projections, then you might get an individual who is conscious of a pretty thick shadow. Because Carl Jung says we project what we're unconscious of so that we can see it. Such a man has saddled himself with new problems and conflicts. He has become a serious problem to himself, as he is now unable to say, they do this or that. They are wrong and they must be fought against. Such a man knows that whatever is wrong with the world is in himself. And if he only learns to deal with his own shadow, he has done something real for the world. He has succeeded in shouldering at least an infinitesimal part of the gigantic unsolved social problems of our day. Like the Islamists saying, the people talking about Muhammad negatively should be fought against, that they're wrong. let's go into the science as to how the universe as a mirror works and how we live in a holographic universe. This is my weekly webinar. Let me scroll back to the page where I go over this. Here it is, okay? So the map of consciousness. This map right here shows that how all our emotions that are expressed via our energy body or our soul out through our hearts, and they all vibrate at different frequencies. So what happens is we all have a soul, and our souls communicate out through our hearts, heart and soul, right? And our hearts have the neurological structure in our hearts is far more complex than our brains, and our hearts send about 90% more signals to our brains than the other way around. Yeah, that shocked me too. So when I have fear in my soul from unprocessed trauma, my heart just continually communicates fear, fear, fear to my brain. And then my brain keeps releasing cortisol, which is the fear hormone. Then when I have so much cortisol in my blood routinely, which isn't healthy, I keep a lot of sugar in the blood to be ready for fight or flight. So then I probably crave sugar. Additionally, sugar creates inflammation in the body, and how many diseases do you know that are caused by inflammation? So the scientific field epigenetics teaches us what happens before the genetics, right? What happens in the field before the genetics hit? Like when I think of fear, then it turns on cortisol and I have too much cortisol in my system. If I think of a hamburger, my mouth salivates whether the hamburger is present or not. So epigenetics really kind of solidifies an Einstein quote saying the field is the sole governing agency of the particle. The field meaning the energy field of the soul, the particle meaning the body. And I also did research on cancer, viruses, and bacteria. They all vibrate over here below 100 hertz and below. Well, when I started spending most of my time in courage, love, and enlightenment as opposed to fear, guilt, and shame, I stopped getting sick about 6 years ago. I haven't been sick in 6 years. I never got sick during COVID, never got the shot, went to hot yoga the whole time. So I was out and about. I never got sick because I didn't fear it. I wasn't vibrating super low. I didn't need my body to get sick to show me how my soul is sick. I mean, to quote Dr. Gabor Mate, who's a family medicine practitioner who specializes in how childhood trauma impacts adults. Because, I'm summarizing here, but when children don't learn how to say no, to protect their authentic self and stand up for their physiological needs, the body will say no for them in the form of cancer or other diseases. So when my energy isn't saying no, my body will show me how much I need to stop putting other people before myself, how much I need to care for myself. And the whole time, my soul has been giving me feedback about how I feel about myself. And if I feel a lot of hate, shame, and fear, then I stay in these lower vibrating emotions like I did for most of my life, unhealed. Because I internalized that from my parents. My parents did not have a secure attachment to self. They had a traumatic childhood. So I internalized their self-hate, took it on as my own unconsciously, projected it all throughout my life until I healed over the past 10 years. So how can we use the universe as a mirror, the fact that we live in a holographic universe, to help us heal from our childhood trauma? Here's how it works. So if I have like 40 degrees vibrating at selfishness inside of my soul, when other souls around me also have that same 40 hertz, when mine moves, it'll make theirs move, and that will draw my attention or perception. And that's my tribe, my identity, showing me myself. Or if I have part of me that vibrates at 500 hertz, really compassionate, really loving, then other people that say 500 hertz will also move around me, again, showing me my tribe, showing me who I am. So let's watch this in real time. And this experiment shows us that when you have 512 hertz and 440 hertz tuning forks, when 512 moves, the 440 doesn't even notice. When you have 440 moving and 440, when one moves, so does the other. And that's how the universe is a mirror. There's the movement. There's the attention. I'm going to stop sharing here. When I found that experiment showing me how, based on the laws of physics, that works, I was quite excited. So now I'm going to share my two favorite videos, how the heart is a physical vortex, how this all works, the heart. And we're going to lean on a Tesla quote, to understand the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. And we're going to learn that blood flows before the heart even forms in an embryo. So the second video is how that embryo, how the heart forms in the embryo. It's fascinating.
Let me just read this because I think it's actually probably one of the best descriptions of the heart that I've ever run across. They taught you the heart was just a glorified meat pump, that it squeezes and pushes blood like some crude mechanical device, a hydraulic engine made of flesh. That is what they want you to believe, because if you buy into that primitive lie, you never ask deeper questions. But it is false. It has always been false. And the real science proves it. Dr. Francesco Torrenguas, a Spanish cardiac researcher, discovered what the textbooks refuse to acknowledge, that the heart is not a pump. He dissected thousands of hearts and found that the heart is a single continuous muscle band folded into a spiral. He proved that the heart works like a vortex generator, creating suction and torque, not pressure. He called it the helical ventricular myocardial band, and it changes everything. The real movement of the blood comes from pressure differentials, electromagnetic flow, and coherent resonance. The blood spirals naturally. It need not be forced through miles of arteries and capillaries. The so-called pump is not strong enough to push thick fluid through 60,000 miles of tubing. That is basic physics. That lie was dead on arrival. Here is the truth. Blood moves before the heart forms in the embryo. That is, by the way, a documented fact. It flows via frequency, resonance, and electric charge. The body is a field, not a factory. Your heart creates a toroidal electromagnetic field that radiates 6 meters from the body. This field syncs with the earth, the sun, and every living being around you. It is a resonator, a tuner, a conductor. It aligns the rhythm of your cells. It feels, it remembers, it emits, and it responds to emotion, thought, light, sound, and breath. When you feel love, grief, fear, or peace, your heart transmits it. It is the central frequency modulator of your biology, not a pump. And the institutions know this. The Heart Math Institute has measured these fields for decades. They know the heart has more neuronal cells than parts of the brain. They know it is a second brain. They know coherence in the heart transforms the entire nervous system. So why are they still teaching children a 400-year-old guess from William Harvey that has never been updated?
Let's talk about that. Why wouldn't they teach people that the heart is a vortex like a black hole? How powerful is a black hole? And we live in Western society. That's a Christian worldview. Fear God. That's an external locus of control. Well, now we know we live in a holographic universe. So how can God exist outside of how the universe operates? A question for you to ponder on your own. But if we look at psychology, when you have an external locus of control, like my parent says when I can and when I can't express myself authentically, no, that's right, but don't express that way. That was my life. I was too perceptive, too articulate, too I saw everything. So just zip it, Carrie, zip it. I had a hard time making friends my whole life, failed marriage, spent a ton of time alone, tons of challenges because I could not express my authentic self. And Carl Jung will show us the way again. To summarize him, he says one does not experience loneliness because one has no one about him. One experiences loneliness because one is unable to express what is important to oneself, unable to be authentic, unable to individuate. Individuates Carl Jung. That's why I love Dr. Gabor Mate. He's so great. So let's get to the last one, how hearts formed. Before the heart beats for the first time, something far greater begins to move. Long before your heart ever beat, thousands of cardiac cells made a silent decision. There was no pulse, no rhythm, no sound. In the earliest stages of development, individual heart cells begin firing electrical signals on their own. Then something remarkable happens. They synchronize. Separate impulses align into one coordinated electrical wave. We all align with the highest vibrating energy. So whichever one's vibrating the highest, it all pulls it in that way. That's why enlightenment is the highest vibrating emotion, and enlightenment attracts so many people to you because you can now share all this wisdom and you can help them vibrate higher as well through this process of morphic resonance. That wave triggers the first contraction, the first heartbeat, the beginning of a rhythm that can last a lifetime. So, wow. Anyway, that's what I have today. Please grab a free copy of my ebook below. I hope that was helpful, and take care. Bye.